Hello, and welcome back to Lab 6, Scale and Load Balance Your Architecture. I'm Richard Golson, and we are at Task 4, where we will verify that load balancing is working. All right, so let's take a look here. What I want to do first is note that we left off on the auto-scaling groups, and we can see now that it's reflected in the table up here that we have the two instances. This matches our desired capacity. One thing to take note of, as desired typically reflects the number of instances that are currently required based on what you either configured manually or were configured based upon the automatic scaling configuration you've set up here. We set up a target tracking scaling policy to keep our instance count sufficient to keep average CPU utilization at 60%. We're going to add and remove, or auto scaling will add and remove EC2 instances based upon trying to achieve that metric. So what we'll be doing later on is testing that. So let's move on to taking a look at the instances. And so when we take a look at the instances, we can see that we have two instances named lab instance. These are instances that are part of our auto scaling group. Next, let's confirm that the new instances have passed their health checks. So what I'm going to do is go to my target groups. So rather than looking at health checks within instances, we can go to our target groups and we can see that we now show two healthy targets. We have no unhealthy. And so this is good news. Our total targets and the number of healthy targets match. If we take a look over here at the targets, we can actually see those two EC2 instances. And if I take a look here, these are hyperlinked and they would take us back to these instances. So those should match up. Another piece I wanted to point out is this shows us that we have an instance in US East 1A, so this first availability zone. We have another instance in US East 1B, this availability zone over here. And that can be confirmed here as well. Note that there is a register targets button. So if we wanted to register additional targets that didn't get picked up, maybe we didn't use an auto scaling group because we don't have to, we could do that. We can also deregister a target. So we didn't want to use that target anymore. We could deregister it manually through here. And then let's take a look at what else we want to take a look at. Also note that if we make changes and they're not reflected in here yet, note that you can hit the refresh button here. Next, let's go to our load balancers. And so when I go to my load balancers, you can see we have a load balancer already displayed here. This is the one we created earlier. And by the way, I preloaded these, but here is the load balancer section with the load balancers button and the target groups. Here's our auto scaling. Just a reminder, they're all down here at the bottom of the navigator. So what I want to do is get the DNS name for this load balancer. So rather than using a public IP address, what application or the EC2 load balancer service does is it provides me with a DNS name, because the load balancer itself is a logical resource that AWS manages. It's a fully managed load balancer, which means that I don't see the IP addresses that are used with that. Rather, they're going to provide a public IP for that. And I simply need this name, and then I would ensure that the resource that I want to access, let's say it's www.iammywebsite.com, I would associate that with this DNS name, and I can use AWS or Route 53 to do that. All right, so I've already copied that and pasted it and loaded it, and you can see that I've loaded the page. It's not very exciting. You can see that it's the same test page we've used before. One of the great things, though, is it does show me the instance ID and availability zone. And when I hit the refresh, what I should see is these values changing as traffic that is being sent by the refresh is sent to the application load balancer. The load balancer should be sending each request in sequence using what they call round and robin to the instances in each availability zone. So as I refresh, I should see those values changing as it's sending it to the different EC2 instances. It's just a handy thing. So let's go ahead and try this now. I'll go ahead and click it. And there you can see it switch to 1B. You might not see it happen right away if there's a little lagginess between things, but typically as I refresh, I'm telling the browser to make a new HTTP request to fetch the pages from the server, and that's what it's doing. So each time I click that, I'm increasing my request count, and I can see that it's making the requests to each of those. So my load balancer is working, and it's distributing the load across my different EC2 instances. If I go to my auto scale group and take a look here under monitoring, I can see that my group size doesn't change because I'm not putting any load on there. So I'm still at 2 instances in my group. And then if I go to my target group and take a look at monitoring there, I can see that I have the 2 healthy instances, no unhealthy instances. And then I can see my request count here. I had 8 requests in a fairly short period. If you click on this, you can maximize this, and then you can actually do this, make it a little easier to see. There were 8 in that. If I go back over to here, let's do it a few more times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll leave it at 6. And this, we may not get that information right away. It may take a little bit of time. There it is. It's coming in pretty quickly. It'll take a moment for this to refresh, but you can see this is that new set of requests. Looks like it capped out at 5. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on over here. So we've essentially checked to see that it is functioning the way it's meant to function. We haven't put any increased load on it sufficient to drive our instance count up. We're going to be doing that in the next video. Let me do one last refresh. I just want to check it out. Yeah, and there you go. So it requires a little bit of time between each of these requests. So we're not going to be able to see that right now. We can come back to that. So when we come back, we're going to test the auto scaling. All right, we'll see you then.